the werewolf. The streets of London were usually bustling with activity, but lately a sense of unease had fallen over the city. Rumors of a creature lurking in the shadows had spread like wildfire, and people were afraid to venture out after dark. They spoke in hushed tones about a werewolf, a creature with the ability to change from a human into a monstrous beast. Emma had heard the stories, but she didn't believe in them. She was a skeptic, a woman of science who relied on facts and evidence. But when she found herself walking home alone after a late night shift at the hospital, she began to regret her skepticism. She heard a rustling in the bushes and froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She told herself it was just her imagination, that there was nothing to be afraid of. But then she heard a low growl, and a pair of glowing eyes emerged from the shadows. Emma's instincts told her to run, but she was frozen in fear. The creature was massive, easily 7 feet tall, with razor-sharp claws and teeth like knives. Its fur was a dark shade of gray, and its eyes glowed like hot coals in the darkness. The werewolf took a step forward, and Emma's instincts clicked her. She turned and ran, her heart racing as she sprinted down the deserted street. She could hear the werewolf's heavy footsteps behind her, and she knew she had to find shelter fast. She spotted a small alleyway up ahead and darted into it, hoping to lose the creature in the maze of narrow streets. But the werewolf was faster than she anticipated, and it quickly caught up to her. Emma turned and faced the creature, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had no chance of defeating it, but she wasn't going down without a fight. She reached for the pepper spray in her pocket, but before she could use it, the werewolf lunged at her. She felt its claws sink into her flesh, tearing through her jacket and leaving deep gashes on her skin. She screamed in pain and fought back, but the werewolf was too strong. It pinned her to the ground, its hot breath on her face as it prepared to deliver the final blow. But then something unexpected happened. The creature suddenly recoiled, letting out a pained howl as it stumbled back. Emma scrambled to her feet, her eyes widening in shock as she saw a man standing in front of her, a silver-tipped spear in his hand. The man was tall and muscular, with long, flowing hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore a leather tunic and trousers, and his feet were clad in thick boots. He looked like he had stepped out of a medieval fantasy novel, and Emma wondered if she was hallucinating. "Are you all right?" the man asked, his voice deep and gravelly. Emma nodded, too shocked to speak. The man turned to face the werewolf, which was now on all fours, snarling and snapping at him. The man raised his spear, pointing it at the creature's chest. "Back, foul beast," he shouted. "You shall not harm this woman." The werewolf hesitated, its eyes fixed on the man's spear. It seemed to be sizing him up, trying to determine if he was a threat. But then it lunged forward, its jaw snapping shut on the spear. The man was caught off guard, and the werewolf managed to yank the spear from his grasp. It tossed it aside and turned its attention back to Emma, who was backed up against the wall, her eyes wide with fear. But then something unexpected happened. The man let out a loud whistle, and a pack of wolves appeared out of nowhere. They surrounded the werewolf, snarling and baring their teeth. The werewolf hesitated for a moment, then turned and fled into the night, disappearing into the darkness. The man turned to face Emma, a small smile on his lips. "You're lucky I happened to be passing by," he said. "That beast could have killed you." Emma nodded, still too shaken to speak. The man offered her a hand and she took it, letting him help her to her feet. "My name is Marcus," he said. "And you are?" "Emma," she replied, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. Marcus studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "You are bleeding," he said. "We need to get you to a doctor." Emma nodded, and Marcus led her out of the alleyway and onto the deserted street. They walked in silence for a few moments, the only sounds the distant barking of the wolves and Emma's ragged breathing. Finally, they reached a small clinic on the outskirts of town. Marcus helped Emma inside and explained the situation to the nurse on duty, who took one look at Emma's wounds and rushed her into the back room for treatment. Marcus waited outside, his mind racing with questions. He had heard the rumors about the werewolf, of course, but he had always assumed they were just old wives' tales. He had never seen one in the flesh before, and he couldn't help but wonder what had caused the creature to appear in the heart of London. As he paced back and forth in the waiting room, Marcus heard a commotion outside. He rushed to the door and peered outside, his eyes widening in shock as he saw the werewolf back in its human form, stumbling down the street. The creature was covered in blood, its clothes torn and its face contorted in pain. It looked up at Marcus and let out a pitiful groan, then collapsed onto the pavement. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then approached the creature cautiously. He knelt down beside it, studying its face. It was a young man, no more than 20 years old, with tousled brown hair and blue eyes. "What happened to you?" Marcus asked, his voice soft. The young man groaned, clutching his stomach. I don't know," he gasped. One minute I was walking home, and the next, I couldn't control myself. It was like something took over my body." Marcus nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. He had heard of cases like this before, of people who had been bitten by werewolves and transformed into beasts themselves. He wondered if this young man was one of them. He helped the young man to his feet, then led him inside the clinic. The nurse took one look at him and rushed him into the back room for treatment. As Marcus waited outside, he couldn't help but wonder what was going on. The werewolf attacks were becoming more frequent, and he knew it was only a matter of time before the city was plunged into chaos. He resolved to do something about it. He didn't know what exactly, but he knew he couldn't stand by and let innocent people be attacked by these creatures. He had to find a way to stop them once and for all. Emma emerged from the back room a few hours later, her wounds bandaged and her face pale. Marcus helped her to her feet and walked her out of the clinic, then hailed a cab and escorted her back to her apartment. As they parted ways, Emma turned to Marcus, a look of gratitude on her face. "Thank you for saving my life," she said, her voice trembling. Marcus nodded. "I'm just glad I was there to help," he replied. Emma hesitated for a moment and reached out and touched Marcus' arm. "Be careful," she said. "There are things out there, things you can't even imagine." Marcus nodded again, then watched as Emma disappeared into her apartment building. He stood there for a moment, his mind racing with thoughts of werewolves and danger. He knew he had to act fast if he was going to stop the werewolf attacks. He needed to find out more about these creatures, to learn their weaknesses and their habits. He needed to find a way to kill them, or at least drive them away from the city. Over the next few days, Marcus threw himself into research. He spent hours at the library, poring over books and old manuscripts, searching for any information he could find about werewolves. He learned that these creatures were notoriously difficult to kill. They were immune to most conventional weapons and could only be defeated by silver bullets or blades. He also discovered that werewolves were attracted to the scent of blood and would often target people who were already injured or bleeding. Armed with this knowledge, Marcus began to plan his attack. He sourced the city for silver bullets and fashioned a special silver blade that he could use to take down the beasts. He also made a concoction of herbs and spices that he hoped would mask his scent and keep him hidden from the werewolves. One night, as the full moon rose high in the sky, Marcus ventured out into the streets of London. He walked for hours, his senses on high alert, searching for any sign of werewolves. Finally, he heard a rustling in the bushes and caught a whiff of the distinctive werewolf scent. He drew his silver blade and approached the bushes cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. As he stepped closer, he saw the glint of a pair of eyes in the darkness. He raised his blade and prepared to strike, but then he saw something that made him hesitate. The werewolf was just a young boy, no more than 12 years old. He was covered in fur, his eyes wild and fearful. He looked up at Marcus with a pitiful expression and let out a soft whimper. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then lowered his blade. He knew he couldn't kill a child, no matter how dangerous it might be. He took a step back, his mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. Just then, he heard a rustling in the bushes behind him. He spun around, his blade at the ready, and saw a group of werewolves emerging from the shadows. Marcus knew he was outnumbered, but he refused to back down. He stood his ground, his blade flashing in the moonlight, and prepared to fight. The werewolves rushed him, their teeth bared and their claws slashing at the air. Marcus fought with all his strength, dodging and weaving, striking out with his blade whenever he saw an opening. The battle raged on for what seemed like hours, until finally, one by one, the werewolves began to fall. Marcus stood there, panting and covered in blood, his heart racing with a mixture of fear and triumph. He had done it. He had stopped the werewolves, at least for now. As he walked back to his apartment, his mind racing with thoughts of the night's events, Marcus knew he had changed forever. He had seen things that most people could never imagine, and he had fought against creatures that most people believed were only legends. He knew that he could never go back to his old life, not after what he had experienced. But he also knew that he had a new purpose now, a new mission in life. He would continue to hunt the creatures that threatened the people of London, to protect them from the dangers that lurked in the darkness. As he entered his apartment, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. He had saved lives, and he had proven to himself that he was capable of great things. But he also knew that the werewolves would not be gone for long. They would regroup and come back, stronger and more dangerous than ever before. Marcus would have to be ready for them. He would have to continue his research and learn everything he could about these creatures. He would have to train himself to be faster, stronger, and more skilled with his weapons. He knew that the fight would never be over, that he would always be in danger. But he also knew that he could never give up. For Marcus, the werewolf attacks were not just a threat to the people of London. They were a personal challenge, a test of his strength and courage. And he was determined to pass that test, no matter what it took. The end.